Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Conversations with Caregivers. My name is Shayna Purser, and I'm the program specialist at PsychArmor, and I am myself a caregiver. This series, sponsored by USAA, is an opportunity for us to virtually engage and learn with fellow military and veteran caregivers about difficult issues that affect our lives. These events are intended for military and veteran caregivers to learn together, discover new resources, and change the narratives of their own experience, and to also build resilience. Please note that these virtual events will be recorded and posted to the PsychArmor website, and an email will also be sent to all attendees. As we approach a significant day full of memory and meaning, we wanted to invite you to join us in reflecting not only on the tragic events of September 11th, but also on how our nation, that includes civilians, military communities alike, joined together as a nation, not only in the days, weeks, and months following these tragic events, but also in the years following, in order to support our communities, first responders, service members, military families, and military caregivers. Many heroes emerged from these events, but their heroism often came at a great cost. This heroism of our veterans, our families, and their caregivers continues to this day. So although one war has ended, the battle wages on for many military and veteran families. The lasting effects of 9/11 will continue to have implications for the warriors who answered the call to protect our nation, as well as the caregivers who took on new roles in the wake of injuries and illnesses, and for the families whose families did not return. Many of us can readily answer the question, where were you in relation to the tragic events of 9/11? So we would like to ask you, where were you? We want to hear your stories, and we would also like to invite you to share with us in the chat box. When listening to another person's story, you may also catch glimpses of yourself. Knowing that we have shared feelings and experiences can help us create unity and inspire action. And we, as a community of peers, can instill a culture of mutual healing and growth from these tragic events. Today, I would like to thank Dr. Roxana Delgado, who has joined us. She is a caregiver to her husband, retired U.S. Army Sergeant First Class Victor Medina, who sustained a traumatic brain injury during his third tour in Iraq. In addition to caregiving, Dr. Roxana Delgado is an assistant professor at the School of Medicine, where her professional experience has been inspired by her firsthand caregiving experience. Roxana takes on a very, very, very active role in the military and veteran caregiver community through her advocacy as an advisor for multiple organizations, as an Elizabeth Dole Foundation Fellow alumni representing the state of Texas, and through co-authoring the Caregivers Companion book. Roxana, I would personally like to really thank you for joining us today. I am honored that you can join us in this discussion. And I would really like to invite you at this point to introduce yourself in your own words, but also share with us your story as it relates to the events of 9/11 and those that followed.
Thank you for having me, Shauna. PsychArmor, it's always such a pleasure to share with the amazing organization that is really inspiring education among our community. I'm very excited. Thank you for everyone that is joining. I seen in the chat we have some attendees, so thank you so much for being here today. So yes, 12 years ago, 2009, my husband was wounded in action in Iraq, and he sustained a traumatic brain injury. That definitely completely changed our life. But our journey actually started in 1996 when we met in college. And it was such an amazing time. We were both full of dreams and goals and you name it, so many beautiful things for our life. We married in 2000, and at that time, Victor was Army Reserve, very proud military, but his professional career as an accountant and controller for a company really was putting a lot of strengths to continue at that, reserve position to be a reservist. So he started on his way out. He transitioned out of the Army Reserves, And then 9/11 happened. We were only married for a year and a half when 9/11
Married for a year and a half.
Year and a half. And,
Wow.
9/11 happened, and our life changed. Like many lives changed that day. Like Shauna asked you, where were you that day? Well, I can tell you exactly where I was. I was in school. I was doing graduate school, grad school, and I was sitting in a lecture listening about the epidemiology of cardiovascular disease in the United States.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
And I still remember this classmate rushing into a room and saying, the towers fell. And because she was a joker, we all thought that it wasn't a good joke, right? So we looked at her and we're like, Carmen, this is kind of like not a good joke. She said, I am not joking. We need to go out. We need to see what is happening. It's all over the news. And I remember the lecture was over, of course. And that day there was a somber, and of course, like many of us in the nation felt sorrow, despair, shock. What is this that we're seeing in our TV monitors?
It was unbelievable.
And it was incredible. There was so many emotions that come with tragedy. And I think that's one of the reasons why we all remember exactly so well, where were we? Because it's a moment that really changes our lives. And the same holds true when people go through tragedy and can't remember exactly where they were, how it felt, how the smell, everything. So anyway, fast forward, I get home. Of course, that's the topic of the month, the year, the day, everything. And months later, Victor came home and he said, honey, I just feel my calling. I cannot stay as a civilian and just continue to work as an accountant, and I know where I need to be. And as a very supportive wife, I didn't know what I was signing up for, to be honest. When you're in your 20s, you're full of, goals and all that. But I just knew that as a family, we needed to do something. So he joined the active duty Army. And our journey as an active duty Army family started in November 2002. He did some schooling and all that. So that's how our journey started. And Victor did a deployment right after in 2003. At the beginning of 2003, he was already in Afghanistan, and he spent 14 months during that first deployment. So yes, life, we can have so many goals and so many dreams. And this is what I call the life detours. We were taken to places and we were doing things that we didn't envision back then. But anyway, that's part of the first beginning of our story.
Wow. So, he was transitioning out of the military at that point and was working as an accountant of all things.
Yes.
You were in grad school, and you said you were in your 20s, and you had plans, aspirations, goals. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. So I was going to school for a master's in epidemiology. So in my mind, I was going to be transitioning to do a doctorate in epidemiology, and I was going to be working at the CDC in Atlanta. So, and then Victor, I talked to Shauna about this earlier at another time, and I said, I want to be part of the epidemic intelligence community. So I was going to be traveling the world, discovering diseases and all this kind of like very cool stuff. And Victor was going to be an accountant, and he was going to just, work from home or whatever it was and incorporate.
So you would be the globetrotter, and he was going to be at home doing the accounting stuff.
And it became the completely opposite. Victor would be the one going to deployments, and I was going to be the one staying home and of course working. And yes, I became an epidemiologist. I had to wait a bit longer to do my doctorate, but I became an epidemiologist, started working right away in research and all that, but in a very different setting and environments. I started working with veterans right early in 2005-06. I started working in research that was looking mostly at traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and the effects of that in veterans. So very different than what I planned, but amazingly fulfilling. It was incredible how that life detour was not for the bad, but I would say it was transformed the way that we moved on in our journey.
So you mentioned he went back into active duty, and at that point he was the globetrotter, and he went overseas for a series of deployments. And this was one of your major life detours.
That was one of my major life detours, having to put on hold a little bit my career to be able to be, who I wanted to be in that sense, the supportive wife and spouse that I wanted to be. Also, one thing that we need to acknowledge is that when the service member raise their hand and they say, I commit to the mission, the entire family signs up. So I always felt that commitment and that incredible, meaningful goal of being there for him, not only for him, but for the mission that he was fighting for. I was always very involved with the families early on, with through different programs and all that. So it's when we talked about service members and we talked about veterans, it's not just the veteran. It's the entire family, and sometimes the things that we need to put on hold or aside to be able to fulfill that mission. And we see these snippets, right, of experiences throughout the journey. And in our case, we suffered different life detours. The first one was, with 9/11. Now we're going to be an Army family, which we loved. Then in 2009, during Victor's third deployment, he was wounded. And that just opened a completely different realm in our lives. The horizon could have looked really dark, because when Victor was wounded, he was wounded in Baghdad during a combat patrol, and it was an explosive form projectile. It missed his head almost for a foot. Wow. It cracked open the MRAPs, and whoever knows about MRAPs, the doors are 1,000 pounds or so. And it opened, it cracked the door open. Victor lost consciousness. He was medically evacuated immediately. And he was then sent home. He spent some time in Landstuhl in Germany. And then it was determined that because of his injuries, he needed to come home. So he was medically evacuated. He received 3 years of full-time rehab. When Victor was
evaluated— Did you have to travel for that? When you came back, or when he came back? What was that process like for you?
No, so the process was, he was in Germany. I was dying to go to Germany, but they didn't, for some reason, they didn't allow me to go. So I had to wait 6 weeks to be able to see him.
Wow.
And he medically evacuated. He came to, we were stationed at Fort Bliss. And I still gonna remember this, because for me it was shocking that, when you have a loved one that has a car accident, for example, don't you want to run there and be there in the ER and hug them and comfort them, right? So I remember just being there by myself in the tarmac, right? I'm waiting for the plane to land and thinking, as soon as he gets out of that plane, I'm just going to hug him. I've been waiting like almost 8 weeks to hug him. And I saw, him coming out of the plane and everything. And I was stopped, and they said, "Ma'am, you have to wait until he gets in process." And I said, "How long is it going to take?" And he said, "Approximately 4 hours." So there is my husband 100 meters from me, and I cannot even wave, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I followed the ambulance to the ER, which is the first point of in processing. And he processed that day, got to see him, got to talk to him. Definitely, he was not the same husband I sent,
Yeah.
to his deployment. But it's one of those things that you keep getting shocks, like micro shocks throughout.
Micro detours.
Yes. And then the word came that Victor was going to go to the what they call the WTB, the Water Transition Battalion. So he wasn't going to even go back to his unit. He was immediately assigned to the WTB and put on, to receive rehab. Okay. He received 3 years of full-time rehab. Wow. And 23 to 25 different specialists were involved in that neuro rehab for Victor. I remember back then hearing too much the word, he won't be able to. Things are not gonna be able to be. And then I remember just listening and trying to digest and understand how the prognosis and how our life was gonna be in the future. If I would have taken all that to heart, life wouldn't be what it is today.
No.
There was a lot of, and I'll tell you from the beginning of our journey, and I always say this, our 3 most amazing companions were faith, lots of prayer, love, and hope. And I remember hearing from some providers telling me, you cannot live out of false hope. I don't believe in false hope. I think that we can all take advantage of living with hope. Because
hope and purpose
can be a better, absolutely. So despite all the prognosis, life today is so different than what it was.
It's not as dire as
no,
it absolutely was painted to be.
And I don't want to be, painted like things were perfect. No, there was a lot of challenges. There was a lot of, obstacles. Like many families that have gone through combat wounds and deployment and the sacrifices that our service members do for our country. Many families experience incredible challenges, critical challenges.
Can I ask you something on that?
In so many areas. And it brings sadness, and it brings, despair and hopelessness. And we have seen it.
Yes.
We have seen it. So
I have a question on that.
Like, with like detour and voila, things are perfect. No, you have to work hard, but you have to work hard with hope. And that's what I always say. And faith that things are gonna get better. It's all the scope through where you see and the lens that you use to see your future.
So when you mentioned that you were in school, you had plans with the CDC. Well, that was your goal, was working with the CDC
20
as
years
an epidemiologist. You were in grad school when he went back in to active duty. And it was, in his 3rd deployment that he sustained this injury. And you had this major life detour occur. How did that affect your plans moving forward, and what your new future was going to look like outside of his injuries and his prognosis? But what did your prognosis look like as far as career goals, hopes, dreams, aspirations? I mean, how did that affect you at that time?
So, like many families that have gone through this type of injuries and tragedies, or combat wounds and all that, at first I thought, these things are maybe over for now. I was at that time doing my doctorate, and I had many people come to me and say, maybe you want to put that on hold. And after much prayer, I felt like, no, I cannot put this on hold. And then it just shifted. The mindset shifted. Everything got transformed in some way, because now the mission wasn't just to get a doctorate to continue with my career. Now it was about, I need to achieve this so I can work better for my community. I knew that what was coming was going to need from my skills. Yeah. And I think that passion and that mission definitely paid off.
Oh, yes.
It's been an incredible journey to be able to serve, first to understand firsthand what caregivers go through, and veterans with disabilities and catastrophic injuries.
Yeah.
And then that firsthand experience combined with the formal training and professional training, it's just an amazing blend of how we can do things, of course, together, but great things together, and how we can help the community heal in a way that we can continue to move forward. We don't forget, because we don't forget, but we need to learn how to continue to move forward.
And to grow. Grow together.
And that's the main, that's the main message that I try to inspire always to caregivers. Yes, life sometimes and many times is put on hold. Everything
changes.
Yes.
I mean, I can tell you, I lost my identity. I lost my hope, my dreams. I thought, honestly, in my experience, because, in my situation, my care recipient was not active duty at the time of the 9/11 events. However, within the 3 years following, that was the reason why he entered service and was a soldier within the Army. And he also sustained a traumatic brain injury, I believe, in 2005. I'm not good with numbers, so don't quote me on that one. But it, and that's something that, not only, changed our trajectory in that way, but it also changed the direct trajectory in my life. And, especially even following active service, what I thought, my opportunities or lack thereof moving forward, because I felt like, nope, this is it. This is this is what I am now. And it's not going beyond that. And there is no future for me. And that was just an incredibly just daunting, and it was just a terrible expence. I mean, I won't use any big words.
And that's what many of us, at some point would experience, like, now what, what is coming? What if, and all
I gave up my master's degree. My first go, I gave it up. I had to take care of my family.
It's all these uncertainties, right? I always say that when life brings tragedy, instead of looking at that tragedy as a tunnel vision, that's really the amazing moment. That is the moment you have to expand and try to identify the opportunities.
Right.
Because when we focus on the tragedy itself, and maybe that outlook to the future into a negative, prognosis or future, then we tend to let our guard down, and then we say, this is it. We kind of give up.
Yeah.
And I never, just like, and this brings then this topic about Victor went through 3 years of full-time rehab. And I need, to say this because Victor heard, like I did, a lot of, you're not going to be able to this, you're not going to be able to that. And it was all so negative of how his life was going to be for the next, for the rest of his life. And he was only 35 years old. And I remember both of us, we did a list of things, and we said, okay, the things that you're having issues with, and then the list of your skills and capabilities and the things that maybe you can accomplish. So in 2012, when Victor was retiring from the Army after almost 2.5 years of rehab, he mentioned that he wanted to go back to school to be a rehabilitation and vocational counselor. And many people didn't take him seriously until he met this fabulous speech language pathologist. And she listened to him and she said, we need to talk to your wife about this. So she called me. she invited me. She said, Roxana, Victor wants to go back to school and he wants to be a rehab counselor. What do you think about that? And inside myself, I was like, oh my goodness, this is a lot of work. Because at that time I was doing my dissertation. And of course, he's full-time. I was working full-time. I was, he's full-time caregiver at that time. He couldn't even drive. And then, now he wants to go to school. This is getting interesting. Yeah. Anyway, I did not let that, show to him, but I said, let's go for it. You want to do it? Wow. I'll support you. And I am very happy to report that, of course, with a lot of tools and incredible support system, Victor completed a rehab counseling program. So he's a certified rehab counselor. He dedicates his entire week, like he worked full time. He's the one who that work with veterans for to help them reintegrate right to society and all that. And in 2018, when Victor now is completely independent, and I remember him when he was in rehab, one day he said, Roxana, if I'm ever become independent and I can do things for myself, and if I become a rehab counselor, I want to have a foundation to help others. And in 2018, he formed the TBI Water Foundation. And since then, he dedicates his entire day, his entire week, completely volunteer to help veterans and civilians and children.
And caregivers.
And caregivers to overcome the challenges that we all face while walking this journey. So the message that I want to send with this is, we did not package our circumstances and put in a drawer and dwell on it and continue to live, unfulfilled life. No.
Right.
We took everything that was given to us. We transform it into something that we can give back to those communities.
Right. So I have, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
No, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So, I mean, and something I really want to tie it back to, how, the events of 9/11, it reverberated across, all communities within our nation. It called so many heroes into service. And those heroes, were those who went into active service, and otherwise, but also the families who served in their own capacity. And then, of course, this is something, when we're looking at this whole, 9/11, 20 years later, we're still seeing the reverberations of this event 20 years down the line. But in these reverberations, we see these ups and downs, these ebbs and flows in which you're having an experience with, and I think we might have lost Roxana. So while we get in the process of having her back, oh, there she is. That was quick. In that you're on mute, but don't worry, I'm still talking anyway. I never stop. So when we think about this, we think about the fact that it didn't stop at 9/11. It kept going. That, those who answered that call to service gave it their all, and sometimes gave everything to this cause. But then there's also folks who continue to serve, not only in addressing the wounds that they sustained during this time, but also those caregivers and families who continue to experience those reverberations. But it's not all terrible, because these life detours can also become incredible opportunities to find purpose and meaningful change within your life. Because you mentioned CDC, that was your goal. Epidemiologist, you're still an epidemiologist, but you are working in a capacity in which you are serving this community, and it is a very meaningful experience for you, and running a foundation, and also the ability for your husband to also find meaning and purpose through his experiences and these reverberations across time.
Absolutely. And I don't want to say that, I also want to acknowledge that I'm part of that new generation of caregivers to post 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
But when thinking about our nation and our history, the programs and the initiatives that I've been very fortunate to be part of, and
Mm-hmm.
like one of them is, you know, the Psych and some others, those are things that didn't exist.
Yes.
So, you know, World War II, Korea, Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was about time that, you know, that we all could collectively start doing something for our families, our community. So I don't want to make it sound either as if, you know, the 9/11 just created this, you know, opportunity for myself or my family or anything. All we did was taking, you know, what came to our life. And 9/11, yes, was an amazing, terrible, tragic event that not only affected our many veterans and their families, it affected, you know, our first responders, the people who were there. The reality is that our entire nation, directly or indirectly, was affected by 9/11. Even people that I talked to, they said, I don't know anybody that died that day, but you may be the neighbor, and you may be the friend, or your child may be the schoolmate of someone that has been affected by that day.
So we are all connected.
By default, our entire nation, every single corner and rural community, everywhere has been affected by 9/11. And
100%.
Yes. And how I see it is that, yes, Victor was wounded in 2009. We went through a very difficult time those first couple of years, but it would have been such a disservice if we would have done something meaningful out of that, you know, tragedy. So, so that's how we feel that commitment of now we need to take care of those who are coming behind us. I mean, that's our philosophy. We had to shed all these tears. Oh, they better not be in vain.
Not in vain, no.
If I cry more, and I'll be honest, I cry more in 1 year, and I always say this, I cry more in 1 year than the 32 before that time. But I didn't want them to be in vain. I said, if I shed, I don't know, 1 million tears, I don't want the person behind me to shed even half of that.
This resonates.
I want them to know that there's, you know, that now there's programs and there's things that they can do you
can do. And I mean, it doesn't require going and becoming an epidemiologist. I mean, I know the rest of us really want to do that. No, but you can volunteer. You can use this experience to, you know, to help the next generation, to help others within your generation.
Exactly. In whatever it is. I always say that the most important is identifying. Remember when I said about those lists, that list with Victor? We all can do that. We can say, what is my skill? Because I truly believe that all of us have skills, and all of us have something that makes us so unique. And if you just take that makes you so unique, to really give back to the community or change. I always say this, you don't need to change the world. You just need to change one person's world.
Yes. And it's
a domino effect. So
it is, it truly is. And it's interesting because, you know, what everything you just said, it resonated so much because, I mean, I told you, I felt completely hopeless. And it was because of this, you know, reverberation, this ripple effect. You know, by reaching out to those who had gotten to that point where they were ready to give back and utilize their experiences to support others who were coming along after them, that with that, I was able to move forward and to find meaning and purpose as well. And went on to, you know, get my MSW, specializing in military social work, and found a true passion that while I wish this were an event and a series of events that would have not happened to our country. I mean, it's tragic, it's terrible, but with the experiences that I've had as a caregiver, I have found a deeper purpose and a meaning that I would never otherwise have found, and a strength at that. It's incredible. Absolutely. So I mean, it kind of looking at that, you know, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but do you have any recommendations to any caregivers who may be listening, what can you do to help yourself, find your identity? Because your identity, yes, you are a caregiver, but that's not your only identity. And that does not have to be your entire life.
I always say being a caregiver is a role. But it doesn't have to define exactly who you are. Definitely when the person faces caregiving, everything changes. And like I said, things are put on hold, and there's nothing bad about putting your goals, your dreams on hold. There's nothing bad about that. Just don't forget about those. And
that's so true.
Continue
because we often feel guilt.
Yes. And
like, I'm too late. I was supposed to do this years ago. I did it late, but I am happy I did it.
Absolutely. And the reality is that the goals may evolve, and those goals may change and those dreams may change, but never forget that you're a separate person and that you have to maintain, like Shauna said, and I always talk about this, the identity. Roxana had to acquire new skills to be able to care for Victor and continue her life and move forward. So I always joke that I became like Roxana 2.0. I did not forget who I was. I was just a revised version, right? An upgraded version of myself. And I always tell caregivers, is there's one thing that you could do at all costs, do not get absorbed so much by the role of caregiving that you forget who you are and what things makes you happy. Don't ever feel guilty about feeling joy. Don't ever feel guilty about pursuing the things that makes you feel meaningful. Others, connect with others. Do not get isolated. Isolation is your worst enemy. Isolation is your worst enemy. And
connect.
I always have to share in my personal recipe, prayer. If you have a faith community that you can join or that you can be included,
your support
don't
system.
forget about that. Sometimes with tragedy, what happens is that people get upset and then they forget about everything around their life. And they may have been part of a faith community, and then they're like, I'm not going to go back because this horrible thing happened to me. Well, guess what? Life is life, and life is going to have detours and all that. But like I said,
you're not broken.
Correct.
You're in the
and
process
if you take a life detour, and it may be the opportunity to transform it into something that is meaningful. So, first, do not, your identity, do not get isolated. Try to connect with others and seek help. And I know we hear a lot about seek help, but seeking help is not always professional, although that would be the greatest. But
I enjoy that one.
If you have that friend that you can confide and connect with, that friend is going to take you to where you need to be with a professional to be able to talk about what you're feeling. But do not walk this journey alone. It's not meant to be walked alone. And one of the beauties these days that we have community. And there's many organizations offering that sense of community and belonging. And if you can join any of those, that will be a plus. I promise your life is gonna be better with love in it.
Yeah. 100%. Thank you, Roxana. I mean, when we initially spoke on, when you told me your experience, your journey, I was just profoundly affected because you truly did experience it from the very beginning, and how that affected, what your career plans for yourself and for your husband, how that affected, your graduate program, your ultimate goals, but also how you found meaning in what you were going to be doing next. And I was also really hit by, how you remember the events of 9/11 and that moment in time. And of course, the continuation of that. I don't see any questions in the Q&A per se. I do know that we have several several comments in the chat, and I would really love to invite folks to join us in this conversation via the chat. I would really love to hear what your experience is. What were you doing, when this event happened 20 years ago? What this event means to you now? And have you been able to find purpose and meaning even after service, even in your caregiving role? Or even how do you think you're going to move forward next in finding your meaning and purpose?
And if I may add, Shauna,
yes, ma'am.
We would love to hear from you in the chat, all of you. We don't know you personally. We may not know you personally. I don't know where you're sitting at right now, but think about it. If we're, having a cup of coffee in our living room and we're talking about just life. And I just want to say also that my experience, some people may relate to some of it, maybe pieces of it, maybe nothing.
Mm-hmm.
We all have a different journey. We all have a different story, and they're all valid. And it's the collective voices, all of us together, that write history. And caregiving is not just about one story. It's about all of our stories together. So when future generations come and future wars, they can learn from us. The same way that I have learned so much from World War II, Vietnam, Korea, I have spent time with those caregivers. And oh my goodness, I would invite any of you to spend time with those who were caregiving back then.
Yes. And I think that really relates for many of us now, given recent events. And, I recognize, we have two post 9/11, caregivers here, but this really also lends to the significance and importance and every bit of wisdom that, our prior generations have from prior wars that can also give back and help support those who are going through these new feelings and experiences at this point in time. And that can be purpose in and of itself, but also I'd also really like to invite folks to reach out to those people that they know in their communities and in their peer networks who may, be a caregiver or a veteran of a pre 9/11 war, who may have some insights that they can provide to help in moving through this and recreating your narrative. And like you said, Roxana, your words right there, I swear they belong on a t-shirt, because that's just profoundly deep. But I also want to, if I haven't already, which I'm sure I have, but I will say it again, add that underline of emphasis, that narrative can change. And one of the biggest pieces to all of this is that you can rewrite your narrative. And one of the ways that you can do that is through storytelling. Storytelling, there is just this healing component to telling your story, but it does not have to be with others. It helps with its others if you're a talker like me, but also just writing it down and growing from it too, because there's a cathartic, piece to it, but there's also a transformative piece to it as well. I noticed we do have a few comments in the chat. Roxana, do you mind if we read through that real quick to share some of our?
Fantastic. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I'm also looking here at the chat, and thank you so much, everyone that has said such kind words, like inspiring and all that. It's.
She kind of really is, nice, so I get you. I'm inspired, so you kind of are.
You know what? We all, that's the importance of telling our story. You never know who you're gonna touch with that story. I actually met back in 2012 or so a caregiver from the Vietnam era. Mm-hmm. And she actually cares for her husband. He's a double amputee. He was never able to get prosthetics. And she told me she was pregnant when she became a caregiver, and she didn't learn about her husband's injury until he made it to the States. He was medevac, and she was then called, but they didn't get the notification like we do over the phone. It wasn't, the protocol, I guess it wasn't that way. So for her, it was a shock. They were only 19 years old. They still married today.
Wow.
And she's very tiny and skinny. And she said, I had to carry that big man to the shower and bathe him and back, and then having to care for her baby. And, it's those stories that inspire us, like looking at my life, it's like that story about, you eat the banana, you throw the the outer part of the banana and somebody else is eating it, right? I feel so bad in some way, because I'm like, I cannot relate to that. That is not what I experienced. I got a call the same day that Victor was wounded. I knew exactly where he was at. They call me almost every day. So the fact that I couldn't go to Germany just became like meaningless in my sense of, oh, why I wasn't able to be there. And, well, now looking at other stories, I'm like, you know what, then it wasn't that bad compared to what it could have been. So I think that throughout history, we get to learn from previous, previous generations. We get to assimilate more our reality, but then we tend to then make it better for those coming behind. And that's and that's what the purpose should be. As caregivers, our stories, they're all valid. We all have an amazing story to tell. I haven't heard a caregiver story that I'm not.
And there will be different stories, and some will, and it's not one is better or worse than another. We can find commonalities amongst, and that can build our connections, but there is no better or worse. It's just different. And it just really adds to how many folks can we connect with and empathize with and share this space with. And looking at, so I see that, looking at our chat again, I see that we have a few folks that have shared, where they were when, the attacks of 9/11 occurred. And I see that Charlotte was in high school and her brother was in ROTC in college, and his life completely changed that day. And his military service completely changed from what he thought it would be. And wow, you lived in New York as well. New York. Very real. You bring such an incredible point forward, because he was already, it sounds, interested in this path into service, but the nature of that path towards service changed tremendously.
Thank you, Charlotte, for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would say, and this is something that, I tried to, the other day I was reflecting, is where were we, when this happened, where we have been and where are we going? It's that reflection of, if you have lived a life, like, this is one of the slogans that Victor created, wrote some last year. He said, living a life that honors those who are no longer with us, those who gave it all. Yeah. So if you have lived a life that it has honored those who have sacrificed by giving it all, then amazing. Just keep up the great work. If you feel you have not lived that life for whatever reason, don't feel guilty about it, because you still have some years to come to change that. So if in anything, I would love to make a call to all the caregivers to really reflect on where were they that day, where they have been, how the journey has looked like. But not only stopping there, but where are you going? What are your dreams? Your dreams and your family's dreams, and where are you all going? And how your personal story may be of inspiration, or may be of an agent of change for something in the nation. If you are going through maybe a very difficult time where more likely nobody has seen, then be a voice for that community. And if you are having it great, then share it too, so we all know how to make it work. So you know, it doesn't matter the role that you have today and what type of life you have today, you will always help someone that is coming behind, always. So
always. Thank you. I swear, this is all I mean, it's going to be the largest t-shirt known to man, but I'm pretty sure we have at least 20 different t-shirt worthy statements from you here today.
Oh, we do have some
and I know
we have Sherry's here. Sherry's the daughter of a World War II veteran, Purple Heart recipient. I know them very well and very inspiring family. So thank you, Sherry, and you said that
she's in New York. Wow. And that's the thing that once again, you know, goes toward it, you know, a prior generation, but also how this brings together the entire, you know, the entire community, the civilian community who is also impacted by it. You know, those who went in the towers to serve, protect, and save others. I mean, there are so many that are impacted by it. And then looking at Ronald's experience as an elementary principal in Michigan, you know, this impact lives in memory like it was yesterday. And thank you, the country did come together as one after this event. And something that really that really impacted me just within the last 2 days, I read articles on, you know, you think about these children, both civilian, you know, children, but also military children who have been impacted by the reverberations, by those, you know, events in different ways, but also how do we teach this to our children? And so it just really goes to show how many different ways in which this has affected us all, in addition to caregivers.
Yeah. And Melissa, I think, before Melissa Lee, she said that she was a second lieutenant in Quantico. I'm pretty sure, Melissa, you didn't get the same service that you envisioned. I mean, everything changed so much after 9/11, and even the way things were done, the trainings, the demands, everything after, you know, everything that the military had to go through. So thank you, Melissa, for your service. And I mean it.
Thank you. She does. This lady's serious. She's a doctor. You can totally trust her.
But I love our military and our military families. And I mean, I always said I mean it, because I know sometimes it can get so common to hear, oh, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. But, you know, we mean it.
Yeah.
In an actionable way.
Exactly. I know that we are coming up toward the end of today's session. Number one, I really, once again, Roxana, thank you so much for joining us today. And prior to, you know, doing my whole, you know, closing comments and all that fun jazz, I would also like to invite everyone to share any resources that you are aware of, or any recommendations that you might have that could support others in any of the walks of life that we've discussed today, regardless if it's pre 9/11, post 9/11, children, civilians, service members, veterans. Please, you know, load up that chat function with any resources that you think may be pertinent. And we would love to share these resources with our communities, so that we can help make sure that everyone has what they need in order, you know, to best navigate, you know, the weekend ahead. So once again, thank you, Roxana. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate having you here today. It's just been such a pleasure, and I've gained so much for this conversation. Your expertise, your experiences. Everyone who has joined us, if you have any questions, please email us at support@psycharmor.org. I'll also try to throw that in the chat. You can also reach out to our support center at psycharmor.org. You will be receiving a brief survey in a follow-up email after today's session, and we would really greatly appreciate it if you could spend a few moments, I swear it's not too long, to provide us some feedback. You know, your feedback, your comments, they really help us to tailor this series to address the needs of our community. And it's greatly important to making sure that we have the best impact and best outcomes possible. So that is it for this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you at our next Conversations with Caregivers in October, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, PsychArmor and Shauna, for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.